This video clip contains a narrative of the first 5 slides that I gave to you on Friday. The rest of the session has been recorded, and I think you'll know where to find it. So here we go. We're looking at interrupts and concurrency, and I'm going to try and motivate you to understand interruption and the idea of interrupts in a sense that we can actually find in computing. So, first of all, consider a personal assistant who does things like periodically answering the telephone, altering the heating in the office, speaks to people, knocking on the door and entering the office, speaking to people who do not knock on the door but simply enter the office, takes notes when the chief executive officer gives a brief by means of sending the PA a text message, and a general role of making coffee for visitors, and so on and so on and so on. And my question is very simple, and it's this: how is all this possible? What are the requirements of this person's being periodically interrupted by a sequence of tasks that she is expected to perform? How does handling a variety of different tasks become viable? So let's have a look at this. Let's think a little bit about this too. So the logical requirements, the preconditions for the PA to function, it's this, minimally, it seems to me. It's very important that when one task is temporarily paused, in order to respond to an interrupt and possibly finish the tasks that when an allocated time period for the task expires, that the PA knows at least 2 things. Right? Firstly, she needs to remember, or he needs to remember, the task that was being worked on at the point that the interruption occurred. And secondly, the PA needs to know, or needs to record, what the next thing to be done was had there been no interruption, in order to resume the task. I mean, it would be pretty bad if I responded to a telephone call and I finished answering that, and I hadn't the faintest idea what I was working on. I mean, maybe I'd never be able to remember, and therefore the task would never be completed. So it's quite important that there's some kind of memory of what was being done. So logically, it's entirely possible that when task B was interrupted by task C, task B in fact interrupted itself another task, third task A. And in each case, the next thing to be done needs to be recorded when a particular task is interrupted. So if A is interrupted by if task A is interrupted, then I need to know what the task was and where I was at when the task was interrupted. When I finish task B, I need to know where to go back to in order to complete task A. But task B might itself be interrupted by the requirement that task C is performed, and in which case I've got to do exactly the same thing I did with task A, namely record the point at which I'd got up to in performing task B, and and the knowledge that it was task B rather than task A that was being interrupted. And of course, if task A is being executed and task B tries to interrupt task A, things might be um, organised in terms of the importance or the priority of task B. But that's another story. Right. In each case, the next thing to be done needs to be recorded when a task is interrupted. Hopefully that's very clear. And I can say right now that interruption of running computer programs does take place in modern systems. And if I interrupt a running program A, then what needs to be recorded is the next instruction to be executed, the next instruction that would have been executed had that program not been interrupted. And similarly with any other program that is subsequently being interrupted. And it's not clear why and when a task can be interrupted. Perhaps there are rules, such as if the personal assistant is currently editing a file and the CEO alerts the personal assistant of the current need to take some written notes, then the editing task should be suspended for the time being. Or maybe, the filing job has got high priority and must be completed, and the CEO should perhaps respect that. So let's consider that. So the idea of a task being interrupted and suspended is found in computing, and generally there are going to be two main reasons for the interruption. Perhaps you didn't realise this, but perhaps you did. A computer is capable of executing many different programs, apparently simultaneously. And secondly, events outside the computer are regularly occurring which may or may not need the computer's immediate attention. All right, look at the first reason I've given. Many programs can be executing apparently simultaneously, or at least they appear to be running at the same time. But in reality, if you recall the contents of topic 2, at most one program can run on the CPU at the same time. I mean, we know, or should know by now, that the basic way in which a computer operates is to fetch an instruction from memory and then decode it and then execute it. And then, and only then, does it fetch a second instruction. And I think you can see that at any particular moment in time, at most one instruction will be on the CPU, will be being executed. So the fact of the matter is that if we have, say, 3 different programs, A, B and C, then we can create the illusion of parallelism very effectively in the following way. Okay, so we've established, I think we have anyway, at most one such program can run at the same time on a single CPU. But if a very small quantum of time is allocated to each of the 3 programs, it's virtually impossible to determine which program is currently running at a given time t, especially if a small quantum of time is being repeatedly allocated to each of those 3 programs. I mean, maybe I've got 3 programs, red, green and orange, and I give a little bit of time to red, a little bit of time to green, maybe a little bit of time to orange, then a little bit of time to green, and so on and so on. And maybe in some order, maybe it's not consistently the first and then the second and the third, but maybe it's the first and then the third and the second. I mean, it doesn't have to be in a particular order. It all depends how it's scheduled. So, because each program's instructions are being executed for very short periods of time, I mean, maybe 150 nanoseconds, I mean, can you imagine the scale of 150 nanoseconds as a period of time? It's very, very, very small. And, I just wonder, if the time it takes to blink your eye is a quarter of a second, how many 150 nanosecond chunks there are in that period of time? I mean, it's probably a large number. And I haven't got the actual sum at hand, but you might want to try and work it out. And one can imagine that at the same time a video clip is being played, a soundtrack is being played through earphones, and the letter I is being typed and entered into a Word file. It's as though all three events are happening at the same time. And this arrangement is called the interleaving of the execution of the, three programs. And a fact that you should be aware of is that whenever a program needs to perform input or output, and if you don't know what input and output are, I'll again explain it in a moment. Input and output is relatively slow compared to the fact that during each second the CPU can execute, for example, 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 100 or 1,000,000,000 instructions. And let's perform the following simple experiments. Type in the sentence, Trump won the last US election. I'm not talking about the November election. I'm not talking about the 2019 election, 2017 election. God. Using a stopwatch, time yourself. And how many complete seconds did typing that in? Well, I think it's going to take at least a few seconds. I mean, if you're a practiced typist, it might take a lot less time. But I'm inclined to say, well, what a waste of CPU power, because you could have executed 10,000 million instructions, for the sake of argument, during that interval. And in such a case, the program is suspended, freeing the CPU and allowing another program to run on the CPU during that interval. So I'll finish on this slide. So unit programming with input-output overlap can be represented by means of this diagram. Here on the vertical axis, I'm looking at I/O activity, and beneath it the activity of specialized input-output devices. So for example, maybe this blue line represents activity on the keyboard, or maybe this little line here represents activity consisting of data or datagrams being sent out on the internet. And maybe this black line actually represents incoming data from a microwave line of sight device. Okay, so unit programming with input-output overlap looks like this. At this point in time, like just where the cursor is here, the blue program actually needs to do some input and output. Well, okay, give it the task, the subtask of doing the input or output activity to a specialized device. And during this time interval, allocate a different program to run on the CPU. I mean, maybe it runs to completion. Maybe it itself, the black program here, it itself needs to perform some I/O, which I don't show. I haven't shown that. Then I run red program, and at this point in time, perhaps it needs to do some input or output. When it finishes, maybe I resume by executing the black program. Perhaps it's a different black program. But in the interval that's been freed up, I can actually run the yellow program and so on. And if you think a little bit about it, the time it takes to execute all these programs is going to be less than if I didn't take the blue program off the CPU. When the blue program is occupying the CPU, it's not doing any productive work. I mean, what the program's got to do is to say, well, operating system, can you do some input for me? And I'll wait until you finish doing that. And when you finish that, I can finish. But if you think about it, this period of time plus 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 that period of time plus this period of time plus this period of time is strictly less than uh, that plus that plus that plus that plus that plus this period of time. So I'm benefiting. I mean, my programs are going to finish earlier than they would have otherwise done. Anyway, I'll finish there, and I'll just remind you once again that the rest of Friday afternoon session, all I think 150 minutes of it, is in the BBB area. So if you have a look at the virtual classroom area, you'll find it there. And I might indeed actually duplicate the recording because the sound quality is not brilliant throughout. Okay, so have a look at this and prepare for possibly one of the questions on your uh, mid-term assessed coursework. Okay, I'm not quite sure what I'm